Today, we are wading deep into a conflict that really defines our modern economy. It's this asymmetric power struggle between the computational giants,
The platforms.
exactly, the platforms that host our work, our culture, our social lives, and the billions of us, the users, who rely on them for everything from income to just being seen.
That's right. We're going to be dissecting this widespread and often kind of invisible phenomenon of algorithmic resistance.
Hmm.
These are the ingenious, sophisticated and sometimes, frankly, desperate tactics people use just to survive. And not just survive, but succeed against systems that are designed for total control and optimization.
It's a classic story, really. David versus Goliath. But in this version, David has learned how to game the system using its own data against it.
And our deep dive today is drawing on a really incredible stack of sources. It's rooted primarily in Tiziano Bonini and Emiliano Traire's work, Algorithms of Resistance.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book, and we're synthesizing that with some fresh reports on the precarity of the creator economy, the true human cost of AI labor, and also the evolving strategies of high-level corporate leaders. Think Uber, Google, the big players.
So our mission today is pretty clear.
Right.
We want to unpack the moral, the social, and the economic shifts being driven by these platform algorithms. We really want to understand the how and the why. Why are people compelled to fight back?
Whether they're gig workers trying to secure a fair wage or maybe a micro-influencer fighting for a little bit of attention.
And in doing that, we want to figure out what the true hidden cost of all that computational power actually is.
Right. And to understand the resistance, I think we have to first understand the architecture of control. So let's start with the foundation of this whole conflict. What platform power even is.
Okay, let's unpack that. The sources use this term, instrumentarian power. It sounds very academic, but what does that actually mean for, the person on the street just trying to get a ride or post a video?
It's a really crucial distinction. It means these platforms aren't just like observation tools. They are active instruments of control. They are fundamentally geared toward extracting what's called behavioral surplus.
Behavioral surplus.
Yeah. Everything you do, where you linger on a page, the routes you take as a driver, the topics you avoid in a post row, all of it is datafied. It's transformed into this proprietary raw material. Some of the scholars we're looking at even call this a new form of data colonialism.
So they're not just passively watching us. They're actively structuring our behavior. Can you give me a concrete, like an everyday example of me experiencing that power?
Okay, think about logging into Spotify. The platform doesn't just want to play the song you asked for. It wants to automate your future behavior.
Right.
Its predictive algorithms analyze your mood, the time of day, maybe your location, and then they push content that's intended not just to keep you listening, but to make your future choices predictable. Or even to automate the choice entirely.
With something like a Discover Weekly playlist.
Exactly. It's shaping, it's controlling, and it's turning your free time into this raw, monetizable predictability. That's Shoshana Zuboff's term, and it's spot on.
And it's the sheer scale of this control that makes it so inescapable.
Precisely. These massive companies, your Facebooks, your Ubers, your Spotifys, they've achieved what you could call a quasi-infrastructural status. They are the central hub. They sort, they categorize, they create hierarchies for almost all commercial services and cultural products today.
So if you want to order food or book a car or share your music, you have to go through them.
You have to pass through the platform's infrastructure. There's really no viable way around them in contemporary life.
So if that platform power is so massive, so infrastructural, and the resistance is happening at this individual level, doesn't that make the resistance seem, a bit futile? Can one person's actions really challenge a multi-trillion-dollar automated system?
Well, that's the core argument from our sources. Resistance is not only necessary, it's inherent. It's inseparable from the system itself.
An automatic response.
It's a reflexive, automatic response to any system of control. Algorithms are absolutely sources of oppression, but the moment they impose rules on you, they become targets for manipulation and appropriation by the very users they're meant to govern.
And this is where we get to the concept of everyday micro-resistance. It feels like a small thing, but it's the constancy of it that matters.
That's the key. It's constant. The researchers draw this really powerful analogy here to James Scott's study of Malaysian peasants during the Green Revolution.
Right, I remember this. The peasants couldn't openly revolt against the state, so
They resorted to these prosaic, hidden tactics, things like foot dragging, dissimulation, pretending to be ignorant, or just passive aggression.
So micro-resistance in the digital world is basically the 21st century equivalent of dragging your feet.
Exactly. It's the constant small struggles by, the subordinate subjects, and they're designed to gain a small, temporary, immediate advantage. A quick cash boost, an extra minute of rest, a moment of visibility.
The sources call it putting a spoke in the wheels of the platforms.
That's the phrase. They might not be aiming to overthrow the whole system, but these acts are absolutely essential for surviving within it.
That distinction, survival over revolution, that feels really important. But what's driving this survival instinct? This gets us to the clash of what the sources call competing moral economies.
Right, and this concept helps us understand the motivation. It explains why users feel totally justified in violating a platform's rules. The idea itself comes from a historian, Edward P. Thompson.
He studied the 18th century English food riots.
He did, and he argued that those riots weren't just impulsive chaos. They were driven by a collective, deeply held moral vision of what a fair price for bread was. And that vision clashed with the new, emerging, deregulated market economy.
So if we apply that to the digital world, we've got two completely different ideas of what is fair or moral. What's the platform's moral economy?
The platform's version is based entirely on hyper-individualized competition. The platform dictates that success, whether it's getting noticed on TikTok or getting a high Uber rating or even securing a date on Tinder, it must be certified only by these so-called meritocratic factors.
Like your ranking or demonstrable quality or organic growth.
Yes. The platform treats every single user as an isolated competitor. You're on your own in a pure digital marketplace.
And the user's moral economy is the direct counter to that isolation.
Users resist in the name of fairness, and this fair price can take two forms. It can be monetary, like a truly equitable Uber fare that actually covers gas and time.
Sure.
Or, and this is crucial, it can be intangible, like a fair distribution of online visibility, getting the likes, the high ranking, or the placement on a major Spotify playlist that you feel your content deserves.
So if the platform's algorithm unfairly lowers your pay or makes your video invisible, the user feels morally justified in intervening to snatch that value back.
Even if that intervention is a clear violation of the terms of service.
That's the friction point. The platform calls it cheating or gaming.
And the user calls it moral compensation, or leveling the playing field.
That distinction, that moral justification for gaming the system, that feels like the engine driving this entire conflict. So let's use the sources framework to map out these actions. We're looking at 4 quadrants of algorithmic agency.
Strategic versus tactical, and then aligned versus not aligned with the platform's moral economy.
Okay, so the first type, strategic agency aligned. What are we talking about here?
These are methods that are long-term, they're calculated, and this is the critical part. They're methods that the platform actually encourages or, directly profits from.
Okay, so the sources give us the example of Seo-hyun, the business student, using Tinder. She's being strategic because she's playing the long game.
Exactly. She pays for a visibility boost. That's platform-encouraged revenue right there. And she hires a professional photographer to optimize her profile.
She's investing time and money to align with what the platform thinks a high-quality user profile should look like.
And in the music industry, this strategic alignment is absolutely massive. Record labels engage in what they call cultural optimization. This isn't trickery. It's just their business model now.
And this involves sonic optimization. So changing the music itself.
Yeah, altering the music to ensure it complements Spotify's listening format, the specific algorithms of their mood playlists, making it fit.
And beyond just the sound, there's also metadata optimization.
Absolutely. They treat song titles, lyrics, even genres as keywords. They're making sure their content is instantly recognizable and searchable by the platform's index. This is long-term planning. They're anticipating how the machine will categorize their product.
So they're literally modifying the culture to fit into the digital pipeline.
That is a key tenet of strategic alignment.
Okay, so let's contrast that with the quadrant we're most interested in. Tactical agency not aligned. This is the classic definition of gaming the system.
Right. This is short-term, it's improvised, it violates the terms of service, and it often requires this kind of hidden cooperation between users.
This feels like the realm of desperation, of immediate survival.
It is. A prime example is the creation of surge clubs among Uber drivers. The Uber app, by its very design, atomizes the workforce. It eliminates any centralized communication between drivers.
So to fight that, they organize themselves into these private chat groups, totally outside the app.
And what's the tactical action they take using this? this counter infrastructure.
They coordinate simultaneous logouts within a very concentrated geographical area.
So when they all log out at once, the algorithm detects a sudden shortage of available drivers. That triggers immediate surge pricing.
Then they all log back in, snatch that inflated fare, the fairer price they feel they deserve, before the platform can stabilize the market again.
It's effective, it's improvised, it's short-lived, and it's a direct violation of the platform's intended market structure. It's beautiful in a way.
And in the creator world, we see the same thing with Instagram pods. Users get together and mutually like and comment on each other's content within minutes of posting.
Creating an artificial burst of engagement.
Right, designed to trick the visibility algorithm into pushing their content to a wider audience. Again, short-term and definitely not aligned.
Then we have the two forms of non-aligned strategic agency, and this tends to require significant resources or be, political in nature. Strategic agency not aligned on a large scale is what we'd call corporate or political manipulation.
The sources detail government troll farms, which are they're terrifying in their scale and calculation.
We're talking about highly structured teams here, 10 to 12 people, often operating multiple accounts every single day. Their supervisors set minimum thresholds for the tweets and comments they have to produce.
And it's all strategically targeted at political enemies or specific narratives.
Yes, this is not improvisation. This is a sustained, resource-intensive, and deliberate military-style operation aimed at manipulating a platform's political discourse over months or even years.
And the corporate equivalent of that would be paying for large-scale, biased reviews.
Exactly. Whether it's paying for thousands of inflated positive reviews for your own product, or, paying for malicious, biased, negative reviews to harm a rival's ranking on a platform like TripAdvisor.
And these require planning, cash reserves, organizational resources.
And they violate the core meritocratic promise that the platform uses to justify its own existence.
That framework gives us a really clear map. Now, let's move into the day-to-day struggle and see how this actually plays out in the trenches of the gig economy.
Okay, section 2. This is where the rubber meets the road, quite literally. We're shifting from the theoretical struggle for fairness to the physical struggle for survival among food delivery couriers and ride-hailing drivers.
The sources paint a really stark picture of precarity here, and it often starts with a classic bait and switch. There's a Deliveroo courier, Stefano, who described this initial feeling of freedom.
Right, set your own hours, easy money.
But that rapidly transitions into feeling totally dependent on the app. He actually described the job as an addiction, as his shifts and his earnings just inevitably dwindled over time.
And this dependency, it breeds desperation. The surveillance is relentless, and it's not just from human supervisors, but from these constant automated systems that are designed for pure optimization.
The Amazon warehouse example really drives home just how oppressive this automated surveillance can be. The pickers are constantly monitored through their scanners, which display two key metrics:
Productivity rates and the crucial one, time off task or TOT.
And if that TOT goes over a certain limit, maybe 15 minutes?
Usually, yeah. If it exceeds that, they get flagged. And they risk disciplinary action or even immediate termination. The sources describe these monitored rates as a kind of Damocles sword hanging over the workers' heads.
And it forces them into these absurd measures just to maintain compliance.
It's just, the pressure is so intense that some drivers admit to this desperate, almost unbearable measure of urinating in bottles.
Just to save the 2 minutes it would take to stop and use a restroom.
Minutes that might otherwise put them over their allowed TOT. That is such a visceral detail. It speaks volumes about the inhuman conditions that are generated by this pursuit of algorithmic efficiency.
It connects right back to that idea that the platform's moral economy prioritizes efficiency above every single human cost. And because the control is so tight, the individual survival tactics that emerge are specifically designed to cheat that surveillance apparatus.
Like the Amazon pickers who found a loophole to fool the scanner.
Right, what did they do?
They learned to leave a count loaded in their scanner before they took a break. So when they returned, the computer would register that preloaded count, and it would trick the system into thinking they had resumed work immediately.
So they're buying themselves a temporary, desperately needed reprieve from the scrutiny.
That is micro-resistance in its purest form. It's a fleeting digital trick just to catch your breath.
The resistance can also transition into outright retaliation, which is justified by the worker's own moral economy. Let's look at the case of Ankush, a Swiggy courier in Delhi.
Ankush started keeping undelivered food, and he didn't see it as theft. He saw it as a legitimate form of compensation for the damage the platform had inflicted on him.
And that damage was structural.
Completely. The platform hired too many couriers, saturating the market, which in turn lowered his guaranteed orders and his pay.
Yeah.
So in his eyes, the platform damaged his livelihood, and the food was his way of rebalancing that moral ledger.
We also see resistance in the physical domain, specifically against the algorithmic routing.
Couriers often possess this deep, localized knowledge of their cities. Shortcuts, traffic patterns, neighborhood quirks, things the algorithms simply cannot capture.
So they'll intentionally ignore the platform's suggested optimal route.
In favor of their own path, yeah. Knowing it will be faster and more efficient even if the algorithm registers this as a deviation and potentially lowers their performance rating. Their local knowledge overrides the platform's global optimization model.
So all of these tactics, cheating the scanner, appropriating the food, ignoring the route, they're all individual acts, and they're driven by this isolated need to survive. But the platforms are designed to enforce that isolation. How do these workers move from just individual survival to building real collective solidarity?
This is the most powerful infrastructural tactic they use. The platforms, as we said, are deliberately engineered to discourage any collective action. They give you no peer-to-peer communication.
The only line of communication is that asymmetrical vertical one with customer service.
Which is often just a bot. So the workers create their own counter-infrastructure, completely invisible to the platform.
Private chat groups, WhatsApp, Telegram, WeChat.
Exactly. These groups are the single most popular and effective form of resistance because they rebuild the community that the platform actively dismantled.
And these groups serve three absolutely vital roles that push back against that isolating logic of the platform. The first role is as learning environments.
This is where algorithmic awareness is really born. Couriers exchange vital folk theories and algorithmic gossip. They learn tricks like how to cancel an order without losing points, or how to position yourself just outside a busy zone to guarantee you get the next high-value order.
And it builds their collective digital skills.
It does, and what's fascinating about those folk theories is that they're often this mix of, accurate observations and maybe some wishful thinking.
Sure.
The algorithm is a black box, right? So workers have to invent plausible theories to predict its behavior. If a trick works just once, it can become dogma in the chat group. But even if the theories are wrong, the act of trying to collectively figure it out builds organizational strength.
The second role is functioning as hidden transcripts.
Again, this is drawing from James Scott. The subordinate subjects, they have to maintain this compliant public behavior. They have to smile, be polite, hit their rates.
But they need private spaces to take off the mask.
These hidden transcripts are where they can vent their dissent, complain about the lack of respect from platforms and customers, and collectively discuss the morality of their pay. It's where a kind of class consciousness is incubated.
And the third role is maybe the most critical of all, providing mutual aid and safety.
This often transcends professional grievance and becomes a matter of life and death, particularly in the global south. For example, drivers in Mexico established two distinct WhatsApp groups.
One for gossip and one for security.
One for standard gossip, and one used strictly for security purposes.
And what kind of safety protocols did they actually implement using this counter-infrastructure?
They use external apps like Zello to communicate with radio codes. They share their real-time location with each other for 8 hours while they work, protecting themselves against deadly robberies.
Wow.
We see the same pattern with South African Bolt drivers. They are digitally crowdsourcing their own safety nets because, as they put it, the company's safety solutions just don't cut it.
So it confirms that where the platform fails to provide security and community, the workers will just build their own.
It's the infrastructure of solidarity emerging from the infrastructure of precarity. And this collective organization, it eventually moves beyond just tactical survival into structural resistance.
Right. That's the eventual political outcome.
We see collective action ranging from the solidarity logout, which is a coordinated mass strike like the one against Swiggy pay cuts in India, all the way to founding alternative cooperative platforms.
These co-ops, like Robinhood or the Nama Yatri app in Bengaluru, they're founded by former couriers.
And they completely reject the hyper-individualistic moral economy of the big commercial platforms. They base their entire structure on ethical values and anti-competition.
But this highlights the ultimate tension.
It does. As one courier pointed out, the cheap price for the customer is where the precariousness lies. These co-ops, they generate an economy of proximity, they guarantee decent wages, but the service they provide inherently has a slightly higher cost for the end customer.
So structural change requires consumers to accept a new moral economy as well.
That's the challenge.
That's a perfect segue, because that conflict over fairness, it shifts when we move from moving goods to moving culture. Let's talk about the creator economy, where the commodity isn't labor, it's attention. And the metrics game is even more intense.
In the creator economy, cultural production is totally contingent on metrics. Every single digital cultural artifact, your song, your photo, your video, it's optimized, it's modularized, and it's constantly measured.
And we're not just talking about likes.
Oh no, we're talking about skip rates, save rates, the average time spent listening, everything.
It's almost like the creator isn't creating art anymore, but creating something that is, first and foremost, algorithmically recognizable. The sources even talk about the concept of a Spotify song.
A Spotify song is music that's specifically altered to complement the platform's format. It's often designed for playlist inclusion, for shorter attention spans, and to fit specific metadata profiles.
So cultural relevance isn't immutable anymore. It's entirely contingent on whether the platform's algorithm can categorize it and, monetize it efficiently.
And we see platforms going to extreme lengths to optimize this recognition. Netflix, for example, will customize the image it displays for a film cover based entirely on your individual paste profile.
Just to increase the chance of you clicking on it.
Even though the film itself is exactly the same, the presentation is purely optimized for the algorithm.
So resistance here manifests as this coordinated pursuit of visibility. And sometimes this is just raw collective force, like we saw in China with the Ding Talk app.
That was a stunning example of algorithmic agency. You had hundreds of thousands of Chinese students upset about being forced to use this app for online schooling.
And they collectively decided to review bomb it.
They orchestrated a coordinated campaign of mass negative reviews, and they successfully dropped the app's score from a near-perfect 4.9 all the way down to 1.4, basically overnight.
And that level of coordinated action nearly caused the app to be pulled entirely from the App Store.
It shows you the power of mass tactical agency when you direct it at the platform's core ranking mechanism.
Then there's the much more complex world of K-pop data fandom, where fans use these incredibly sophisticated methods to influence chart numbers for their favorite idols. And this is where the fan moral economy gets very, very specific.
They draw this razor-sharp moral distinction between two different practices. They view some seeming as legitimate.
Which is what exactly?
Streaming music 24/7 as a form of moral, sustained digital support. They feel this is earned engagement. It shows dedication.
But they morally reject Sajegi.
Sajegi involves paying marketing agencies or troll farms to use bots and compromised accounts to artificially inflate streaming numbers, essentially buying chart success.
So even though both practices technically violate the platform's terms of service,
In the eyes of the dedicated K-pop fan, Sajegi is greedy, it's immoral, and it cheats the system of fair, organic support.
this is where it gets really interesting for me. The professionalization of algorithmic gaming. We have to talk about the talent manager, Ursus Magana, at 257 Media.
Magana's entire business model is rooted in this deep algorithmic awareness. He figures out how to game the TikTok algorithm to achieve massive commercial breakthroughs for his artists, like Lumi Athena.
His slogan is, influence the algorithm, not the audience.
It says it all.
So what was the specific formula that they used for Lumi Athena's track, Smoke It Off?
It was this frenetic, modular formula. They leverage one act's established following to push these short, highly optimized snippets of another artist's track. They're constantly testing which modular piece of the track generated the highest engagement metrics.
And then they just double down on that specific sound and video style.
And that's how Smoke It Off achieved RIA Platinum certification and started for months.
But the platform fights back, right? This success is fragile because the algorithm immediately replicates the viral formula.
Exactly. The artist himself noted that TikTok inevitably stole my sound, meaning the platform immediately detected the successful template and just pushed out clones, diluting the original content.
Which forces creators and managers into this constant, exhausting pursuit of new musical and video directions just to stay one step ahead of the platform's replication cycle.
And despite all this algorithmic mastery, Magana acknowledged the continued importance of mainstream levers.
Yeah, he said that traditional industry institutions like the Grammys and established media connections are still essential.
Algorithmic success, while it can be immediate and massive, it's also incredibly volatile. You still need those traditional institutions for long-term strategic viability and staying power.
So let's return to the collective tactics used by the smaller creators,
Mhm.
engagement groups, or Instagram pods. Why are they considered such a necessary defense mechanism?
For micro-influencers, pods are described as a lifebelt in the middle of the sea. They view it as a morally acceptable defense against the inherent instability of algorithmic government.
They know that without that guaranteed mutual boost from the pod, their content will just vanish into the digital ether.
So they establish these rules for what they call imposed mutuality. It's a very fragile social contract. They enforce strict rules, often with sanctions for people who don't reciprocate.
But they explicitly reject the more illicit, purely transactional practices like buying bots or external likes.
Right. It's a localized solidarity, and it really mirrors the precariousness that James Scott saw among peasants who were forced to cooperate simply to survive the harvest.
The ultimate and often hidden cost of this constant negotiation and this obsession with performance metrics is the mental health of the creators themselves.
This is perhaps the most sobering finding in all of our sources. A detailed study found just alarming rates of severe mental health struggles, anxiety, depression, burnout among content creators.
And here is the staggering statistic.
hmm
10% of creators reported experiencing suicidal thoughts directly related to their work.
That is nearly double the rate of the general U.S. population when you put it in that context. The cost of algorithmic governance is, for some, literally lethal.
And the drivers of this crisis are clear.
It's the isolation, the constant torrent of toxicity and hate mail, the unrelenting financial pressure from unstable monetization, and fundamentally, it's the obsessive focus on content performance metrics. Every single piece of work you create is immediately judged and rated, and that ties your self-worth directly to this volatile algorithmic output.
So what do the experts recommend to mitigate this?
The clear recommendation from this research is that platforms have to provide creators with mechanisms for income stability. Removing that constant stress of performance anxiety and financial volatility is a critical first step toward addressing the mental health crisis they have, maybe inadvertently engineered.
That transitions us to a pretty stark truth. This glamorous AI revolution is actually built on a foundation of massive amounts of invisible low-wage human toil. Let's shift our focus to the data engine and the hidden labor powering the AI age.
The global AI race requires massive and often unethical low-wage data labor. It's a dynamic that profoundly reinforces global inequalities, and it's a clear example of what we were calling data colonialism.
And we have some very concrete examples of this globalized exploitation feeding the machine. Let's start with the annotators.
We heard about these vulnerable populations being integrated into the AI supply chain. Venezuelans, for example, often former middle-class professionals whose local economy has completely collapsed, are now annotating massive data sets for less than $1 an hour.
And this foundational labor cleaning, labeling, structuring the data, this is what makes the algorithms appear intelligent.
It is, and even closer to the front lines of the AI revolution, you have the case of OpenAI and the Kenyan workers.
This is essential for understanding the ethical facade of these large language models.
OpenAI hired Kenyan workers, often for less than $2 an hour, specifically to make ChatGPT less toxic. Their job was to read and moderate highly traumatic, unsavory, and violent content that was generated by the AI.
To make sure the final product appeared safe and benign to the end user.
It is outsourcing trauma for minimum wage.
And this relentless hunt for cheap labor has led to some ethically fraught scenarios, even in high-wage, otherwise ethical societies. Take the case of Metrock, a Finnish startup.
Metrock needed native Finnish speakers to train their large language model. It's a rare, low-resource language for AI. They couldn't find workers willing to take the low wages they were offering on standard gig platforms like Mechanical Turk.
So they turned to Finnish prison inmates.
And how much were these inmates being paid for this crucial data annotation work?
Just €1.54 per hour. The work included things like transcribing documents and correcting text.
And the Finnish Smart Prison Project, they defended this practice. They framed it as rehabilitative.
Right. They say it prepares inmates for the digital economy, provides cognitively stimulating work, gives them a sense of achievement and valuable skills for life on the outside. It's a narrative of reform.
But this sets a profoundly dangerous precedent. What's the ethical dilemma that Human Rights Watch is flagging here?
The worry is twofold. First, it exploits a highly vulnerable population that has very few choices. And second,
if companies can ethically outsource uncontroversial data labeling to inmates now, What stops them from later outsourcing the moderation of the most traumatic and unsavory content to the exact same captive population?
It just confirms that the narrative of a fully automated, clean AI society completely obscures the reality that actual humans, often marginalized, are the ones powering these systems.
And beyond the labor crisis, the rise of generative AI is heightening another core conflict, the collapse of individual privacy.
Yes, generative AI fundamentally destroys our established concept of privacy because of the sheer scale of ingestion. It sucks up this massive data slurry. Public records, social media photos, employee bios, images from hosting sites, all without individual consent or control.
The sheer volume renders traditional privacy controls obsolete.
Then the core issue here is the violation of what's called contextual integrity. This is a concept we really need to explore.
Contextual integrity argues that information is meant to stay within the boundaries of the context it was shared in. So if you shared a photo on Flickr in 2007 with your friends for fun, that was one context.
Right. When Gen AI ingests that photo, scrapes your name, and remixes it to train a commercial facial recognition model, it completely recontextualizes that information. It violates its original meaning and purpose.
So the data is no longer tied to the intention of the person who shared it. And Gen AI tools just amplify the ability to violate privacy in creative ways.
Absolutely. Think about deep fakes, synthesizing voices, using tools like Descript, the ability to map out someone's entire social network or financial status from disparate, scraped public records. Gen AI provides the tools to assemble a comprehensive, highly invasive profile on anyone based on data they never consented to have merged.
And the crucial point, which fundamentally alters how we should approach regulation, is the opacity of the models. Nobody fully understands how large language models work internally.
And because the mechanism is a computational black box, true individual control over one's data becomes impossible. The old model of privacy, which relied on the individual making responsible choices about what they share.
It's totally irrelevant in this new landscape. We need to shift away from blaming the victim when their networked privacy is violated by the systemic ingestion of this data slurry. The problem is structural, not personal.
Absolutely. And that structural control continues when we look at the corporate giants. Let's widen our view again and look at how companies like Uber are adapting their strategies and how societal groups are resisting as we settle into this age of computational governance.
Okay, Section 5. Here we're examining the corporate meta strategy alongside political and civic resistance. It shows that this power struggle continues to occur at all scales.
Uber's CEO Dara Khosrowshahi has fundamentally shifted their strategy. It's no longer about growth at all costs, subsidized by venture capital. It's all about profitability and transforming Uber into the everything of motion.
This is the one Uber platform concept. The long-term goal is massive and deeply structural. They want to compete against car ownership itself.
By integrating every form of movement.
From freight and logistics to reserve rides and hourly rentals, the goal is to capture the total market share of all movement.
But the sources revealed a really telling discrepancy when you compare the corporate pricing vision to the actual user experience.
Yeah.
Which is where that moral economy conflict always emerges.
Yes. The CEO estimated that a 2.95-mile ride should cost the consumer around $20. However, the recorded actual charge for that same distance in a real-world test was $51.69.
More than double.
That massive gap is the tangible evidence that feeds the user's perception of unfair monetary value, and it's what fuels the need for algorithmic resistance among the drivers.
Okay, moving to political and societal resilience, we see activists across the political spectrum adopting these high-level algorithmic manipulation tactics to circumvent platform control and increase their visibility in a very noisy environment.
This includes the technique known as lexical Algospeak. Far-right activists on platforms like Twitter will use symbols, numbers, and stylized letters, like via, at, sign, CCINE, for example, to encrypt their tweets.
And this serves a double purpose, doesn't it?
It does. First, it allows them to bypass algorithmic bans and moderation systems, getting their message across before the machine can detect and delete it. And second,
it creates this powerful sense of belonging in a secret society for like-minded users who know how to decrypt the message. It strengthens their internal bonds, their sense of persecution.
And on the opposite side, we see an almost masterful display of algorithmic control being used for civic action through digital hijacking.
This is the K-pop fan base again. demonstrating their expertise in data fandom.
They realized that they could flood racist or hateful hashtags like hashtag #MagJo or hashtag Blue Lives Matter with K-pop content fan cams, music videos, just totally unrelated stuff to completely drown out the hateful voices.
It's a clear, tactical, and successful manipulation of the algorithm for a political and civic goal.
These tactical and strategic actions, they show us what is measured and what is valued by the platform economy: transaction, engagement, visibility, growth. But there's a massive critique emerging that suggests this constant focus on those metrics is actively harming our societal ability to cope with shock.
This brings us to the concept of the missing metric resilience, which was introduced by the scholar David Fleming. He warned of the intensification paradox.
Which is.
The harder we strive to make GDP grow, the harder we have to work simply to maintain the existing infrastructure. It leads to a kind of societal pathology and exhaustion.
So he redefined success outside of just economic growth.
Precisely. Fleming defined resilience not as growth, but as the ability of a system or a community to cope with shock, a pandemic, an economic crash, a climate event. And that resilience, he argued, is built through community and the informal economy.
People helping people.
Right. But why is this so problematic for the platform economy?
Because resilience-building activities, relationships, localized bartering, mutual aid, essentially anything non-transactional, are inherently invisible to the current analytics platforms.
The platforms are only designed to track and incentivize transaction, clicks, and engagement.
Anything that builds real-world non-digital community is completely unmeasurable, and therefore it's undervalued by the current system.
And this leads us to the provocative, metaphorical idea of the lasagna metric.
It's the perfect illustration of the platform's fundamental flaw. Instead of measuring how often users chat on an app, the truly provocative metric for communal health would be measuring how often those chat users put down the app and actually meet up in person.
Such as someone bringing the lasagna to a neighbor who has COVID or is just struggling.
That's the idea. That act of bringing lasagna is non-transactional, it's high effort, it's community building, and it's high resilience. It provides immediate support, it strengthens local bonds, and it happens completely outside the digital economy's ability to track or monetize it.
The platforms incentivize endless chat. Resilience demands we stop chatting and start showing up for each other.
What a phenomenal synthesis of the core conflict. We've covered the theory of competing moral economies, the desperate survival tactics of the gig worker, the high mental cost of the creator economy, the hidden labor powering AI, and now the societal need to prioritize resilience over just measurable growth.
The digital world we inhabit is just. It's defined by constant negotiation and friction. Whether it's a food courier using a private WhatsApp chat to organize a safety net against deadly robberies.
Or an influencer using a pod to defend against unstable algorithmic government. Or an activist encrypting a hashtag to evade censorship. Resistance is not the exception. It is the norm.
And it is driven by this profound and ongoing conflict over fairness, compensation, and control.
And what's structurally significant about these seemingly localized acts of everyday micro-resistance is the rise of these highly structured collective resistance forms like the mutual aid chat groups.
We can look at this through the long lens of industrial capitalism.
Just as localized resistance in factories and fields eventually gave way to new working-class organizations like early trade unions and benefit societies, these online solidarity infrastructures, they might represent the early stages of a new class consciousness.
They're like the emerging digital trade unions.
They're capable of shaping the future of the digital economy.
It brings us right back to that core tension we discussed in the creator economy. The obsession with measurable growth and performance exacts a heavy, sometimes deadly mental cost. If true resilience comes from human connection and non-transactional support elements that the platform economy cannot measure and actively ignores,
then the act of stepping away from the machine becomes the highest form of resistance.
Exactly. So what small, non-transactional action could you take today that would be an act of true resilience? Something beyond the reach of the algorithms, something that strengthens your community, not just your profile.
That is a powerful question to end on, one that asks you to consider how much of your life is dedicated to being visible to the system versus being genuinely present for your community.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into algorithmic resistance.